2 years. 2 whole years since she dropped. And Furina is still the most owned character in Genshin Impact. So is she still worth pulling in 2026? Let's talk about it. For me, this question is personal. Furina was my very first limited 5-star. She changed how I personally play Genshin Impact. And as characters come and go, power creep is real and the meta shifts every patch. But somehow, after 2 years and dozens of new releases, Furina is still sitting at the top of the most owned character charts. That's not an accident, and in this video I'm going to break down exactly why. Okay, so starting off with her talents, the normal attacks can basically be ignored because you don't really normal attack with her. There is one interesting mechanic with her user, or like the user mechanic, where you could actually break the shield of the Coppelius thing. Now, let's get to her skill, and this is basically the bread and butter of her kit. Because not only can you walk on water if you have the pets, you can also switch the modes with her charge attack. And depending on which mode she's in, she's gonna have different abilities. So, dark mode is first up. And in the dark mode, she actually gets 3 little companions, which automatically attack enemies and drain a bit of your character's HP. And while HP drainage might be a little bad in hindsight, if you just hear it like that, there is a good reason why this is very important for her. But I'm gonna mention that later on. Now for her light mode, she actually gets a thingy which heals you, and basically that's it. It's just a heal and you don't really use it because you deal no damage. And the only use cases for it are like extreme situations where you need a lot of healing and no hydro application. So now for her burst, and this is arguably the most important part for her to actually be relevant and made her so important in the first place. And it is basically just a damage percent buff based on how much the HP of the whole party fluctuates. So this is where the skill comes very important because it drains the whole party's HP, which basically buffs her points for her burst and increases their fanfare stacks. For each percentage drained of each character, she gets 1 fanfare stack. This buff is actually quite substantial because if you get her to max fanfare stacks, she gives you like a 70%, or like at max fanfare stacks, she gives you a 75% damage bonus and a nice 30% healing bonus. And this also makes it easier to stack her fanfare points, which also really makes you want to run a healer with her, because otherwise you don't get the full buff from her burst and you're gonna be dying way more often. Now, to explain how good she actually is right now in the meta, I'ma let Smart Chaos take over. So, the current meta is very Lunar Reaction heavy, to put it lightly. And Lunar Reaction doesn't scale with damage percent, which makes Furina quite a bit worse, since most of her buffs are 75% damage bonus, and she doesn't really buff EM or any other stat for that matter. And while her personal damage is very great, with the current hyper carry meta, it's not really that optimal for a character to have their own damage as a trade-off for any buffs that your main DPS could get. So, her only real meta team right now is in a Skirk team, which also has been kind of losing relevancy lately, simply because of all the new Luna characters, and why Skirk's team technically is still the 3rd best team in the game if you play Stygian Onslaught and Abyss, where you can only have 1 Columbina for each Notcry character. It is kind of concerning that she doesn't really fit into the meta as well for an Archon that just released 2 years ago. So my final verdict is that Furina is no longer meta, because her only relevant team is a Skirk team that's also slowly kind of dipping in performance. With that said, I do have some personal predictions for the upcoming Snezhnaya update, since Notcry was very reaction heavy, like how back in Sumeru EM was very valuable, and then Fontaine came with damage percent again. I do think that with Snezhnaya we will get a return of damage percent characters, but also with the way Hoyo has been releasing the newest characters, with all of them having a dedicated support, universal supports like Furina are no longer really relevant, but I do believe that maybe in the future she can get a buff again. With all that out of the way, let's talk about non-meta, because for non-meta characters, Furina is a very good pull. because she actually works with a lot of characters, mainly any character that uses damage percent and also doesn't mind getting the hydro application from her skill. So at the end of the day, pull for who you like and pull who you think is the best for your personal account, since what do I know, I'm just some guy on the internet. Also, unlike my other videos, this one is supposed to be actual advice to help people decide what characters to pull for. So if you have any questions or facts that I missed, drop them down below in the comments. And that's it with the video. I hope you enjoyed it, like and subscribe if you did, and follow for more Genshin content.